Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these critical times. Pierre Poilievre is a slam dunk to win the by-election coming up later on this summer and, of course, get back into the House of Commons and do what he usually does best against Mark Carney and the Liberals. Or is he a slam dunk? Well, that may be in question. And it's an interesting dynamic to see what's happening in that by-election because of some of the people involved in it, but also some of the attitudes of the people who are going to be voting. The election, of course, is going to be held, the by-election is going to be held in the riding of Battle River Crowfoot up in northern Alberta. And it seems as if the biggest contender for that seat, besides Poilievre, of course, is somebody named Bonnie Critchley, who is from there, who's making a lot of noise, and a lot of people are listening to that noise right now. Interesting to see just how this is starting to play out. You may have seen Bonnie. She's getting a lot of national attention. I watched her on David Cochran's Power and Politics on CBC, the interview she did with David just a few days ago. And she's making a lot of sense to an awful lot of people. So maybe that result that everybody said was simply a done deal, that Poilievre would breeze to victory in that riding, may not be as easy as some people seem to think. The dynamic here is simply that, well, what happens in a lot of by-elections, quite frankly, the residents of those communities, and in this case it's going to be Battle River Crowfoot, oftentimes are rather resentful that they get used by political parties. Now, let me explain. And I think the Poilievre example is a great one like this. The leader of the party doesn't get a seat. So they want him in the House of Commons. I mean, I know that Andrew Scheer right now is kind of running herd as the House leader for the Conservatives, but they want their guy. They want Pierre Poilievre to be in the House of Commons. And by the way, the idea that he's their guy may even be in question too, but I'll talk about that in just a couple of minutes. So in the process is supposed to be, and we saw it play out here in this particular riding, is some member of parliament who did get reelected in a quote-unquote safe seat gives up that seat for their leader to run in the by-election. And invariably, by the way, that MP who steps aside is usually rewarded with a nice plush job, which I guess has happened to Damien Carrick. So he's off getting a pretty decent paycheck from somebody else. And Poilievre moves in. But what we're starting to hear now is that an awful lot of the residents resent the fact that Poilievre is simply using their riding. As we heard from Bonnie Critchley and a lot of her criticism over the last couple of days, she said, let's be practical. This guy doesn't know this area. He doesn't really care about it. He's simply using the people in that particular riding in Battle River Crowfoot to get back in. She says, do you really think that he's going to come back and talk to the constituents and talk to them about the concerns in their community? She says, well, she's answering her own question. She says, that's not going to happen. He just wants to use this riding as a ticket to get back into the House of Commons. And she said, I, as a resident, resent that. And I think an awful lot of other people resent it too. And now I don't pretend for a second to understand that I can get inside the head of the residents of a northern Alberta town like this. And but I do understand that some people may simply say that, look, we elected an individual, in that case it was Damien Carrick, because we believed in him. He was one of us. He talked to us about issues. And that's why he won such a resounding victory. Now you're going to drop somebody into the riding who really doesn't know and seemingly doesn't care a whole lot about the concerns and the residents in that particular riding. So will there be a pushback? Will the people simply say, we're going to send a message? And that's not uncommon. We've talked about this on the podcast before, that by-elections are usually an opportunity for the residents of that particular riding to send a message, maybe to the government. We saw that with the by-elections in Toronto and a couple of other places in Montreal and out west when Trudeau was still the prime minister. Let's face it, there were a lot of people that were really pissed at Justin Trudeau for a whole lot of reasons. And even in those safe Liberal seats, the Liberals lost, because the residents figured, okay, it's not going to change the dynamic in the House of Commons, but we can send a message. We're going to defeat Trudeau's candidate because we don't like Trudeau. Well, could the same thing be playing out here in this particular riding? Could the residents of Battle River Crowfoot be sending a message not necessarily to Parliament, but to the Conservative Party, saying, don't use us, don't mess with us? We made our choice just a few weeks ago, and now you basically are saying, yeah, but we're going to force this candidate on you because we need to get him in there. Will they push back on that? don't really know, but all I know is the fact that those questions are even being asked these days indicates that maybe this isn't going to be the easy ride that a lot of people seem to think for Pierre Poilievre. Now, there are some contributing factors to this. There is still resentment within the political party, in the Conservative Party, that is, against Poilievre. This is a guy, obviously, who had a great ride for a number of years after he became leader of the Conservative Party because he was basically being compared to Justin Trudeau. And the Canadians, the voters, did not like Justin Trudeau. Poilievre rose. I mean, let's remember, he had an insurmountable lead. At least people thought it was an insurmountable lead before Trudeau stepped down and Mark Carney became the leader of the Liberal Party. And as more than one pundit have claimed, but then came the federal election, and Pierre Poilievre snatched defeat from the jaws of victory and lost not only the election itself, but he lost his own riding. And by the way, some people suggest that that's even a factor, that one of the reasons he lost that riding to the Liberal fanjoy was because the Liberal candidate outworked him in the riding. And I get that can happen. When you're the leader of the party and you want to be the prime minister, you do have a responsibility to the party to be a national candidate too. You've got to go from coast to coast to coast to try to garner votes in all areas. I understand that. But you can't turn your back on the people that put you there. And the people in that particular riding in Orleans, in Ottawa area, said that Poilievre just was a no-show. I mean, he worked just a couple of miles away from Parliament Hill and represented those people, but they said that they hardly ever saw him, didn't pay attention to their issues, and they responded in kind. If that, in fact, is the track record for Pierre Poilievre when it comes to dealing with his residents and his constituents, how do you think the people of Battle River Crowfoot are going to feel knowing that this guy is thousands of miles away? Probably he's not going to live there, that's for darn sure, and he's probably not going to go visit the riding after that too. So will they send a message to the Conservative Party? That remains to be seen, but it's a very interesting question to deal with. The other part of this, of course, is Poilievre himself seems to be getting a lot of pushback from within the party. And we referenced this on a previous podcast from a couple of folks who were out at the Calgary Stampede, which, of course, is the gathering spot for members of all major political parties, the leaders. The Prime Minister was out there, Poilievre was out there, the NDP leader was there, and the photo ops and the pancake breakfast, etc. But a couple of people, John Iverson, Andrew Coyne was there, and even Brian Lilly from the Sun newspaper chain, all seem to be of the opinion that the love that was felt for Poilievre in previous campaigns and previous iterations, especially in Alberta, doesn't seem to be there. There was no outright disgust toward him, but I think a lot of Conservatives are disenchanted with Poilievre at this stage. And I know there's going to be a leadership review later on. And some people are suggesting that may be a cakewalk too. Others are saying, wait a minute, maybe this isn't the guy. It's one thing to say to get the party to 41%, and they tried to spin the election results and say, look at the great gains that we made. Well, you didn't win. That's the bottom line, is winning, and he didn't win. And now a lot of Conservatives are questioning as to whether or not he's the guy that can take them over the top. So this may be an opportunity to basically shove him out the door and simply say, okay, if he doesn't get a seat, that's it, you got to step down. And even if he does win, but only wins narrowly in that by-election, does that send a message that Conservatives, when they do the leadership review, think, well, this guy can't really seem to garner the kind of support that we really need to be the party of choice here in Canada? So there's a lot riding on this. I know by-elections tend to oftentimes kind of go under the radar, but this one's starting to gain an awful lot of attention. And a lot of it has to do with Bonnie Critchley herself. She's an independent, obviously a small C conservative, but nonetheless a local resident who's got some very strong views, and I think is representative of an awful lot of the resentment that Conservative voters feel in that particular riding about the Conservative Party foisting a candidate, in this case Poilievre, on them. Critchley herself, of course, has a rather impressive CV. She was a 22-year veteran of the Canadian Forces, served in Afghanistan, actually did some fundraising for first responders and Afghan and Canadian Forces veterans. So her heart's in it. She's certainly dedicated to this. She's not an Alberta separatist. She's quite clear about that. As a matter of fact, she has a lot of disdain for people like that. She served her country under the Canadian flag and is a very strong patriotic Canadian, but wants people in Alberta and specifically in that riding to understand that there are needs and the concerns of these people, and she wants to be their representative in Ottawa. It's a pretty strong argument. Is it going to be enough to change the dynamic there? We don't know. I mean, let's wait until this rolls out, of course, in August 18th, and as to just how the voters are going to respond to it. But for those of us, and I was talking about this on the podcast, and many others have since election night said, look, oh, this is a done deal. This is a riding that voted so heavily conservative last time. How could he not win? Well, now there are some questions about that as to whether or not he's going to win, or if he's going to win with such a huge mandate. It's an interesting dynamic, and it's one of these things that could have an impact on the political landscape in this country, certainly on Pierre Poilievre's political future, as to how he's going to win, and even if he does win, by how much. Because the pressure's on this guy right now. He can't just win this by a couple of points. He's got to win this big to show that the Conservatives' voters are still behind him. And right now, that's a question that I don't think, in all honesty, even Poilievre can answer. We'll see. That's it for this edition of the podcast. Thanks, as always, for being with us. Thanks for joining us on whatever platform you get your podcasts, on Spotify, Apple, Blue Sky, Substack, YouTube. Great to have you with us. And by all means, as you always have, keep the feedback coming about what we're talking about here, and give us your thoughts on some of these key issues as well. Thanks, as always, to Madeline Kelly for the great work putting this one together. I'm Bill Kelly. Until next time, stay in touch and stay informed.
Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.